Have you ever stood at the end of a long journey and looked back? That's where we find David now, in the final chapters of his life. He was once the shepherd boy who faced lions and giants. Now he is the aged king who has seen kingdoms rise and fall, hearts turn and break, and God's hand move in both judgment and mercy. These last chapters in 2 Samuel aren't just an old man's journal, they are a mirror showing us how we, too, should face life, sin, repentance, leadership, and the goodness of God. Let's walk through them together. David begins this final section not with a sword, but with a song. Picture an old warrior sitting on a hillside singing with tears in his eyes. The melody isn't polished, it's raw, it's real. It's a song of rescue, of how God lifted him out of the waves of death and the snares of Sheol. Have you ever been in a place so dark, so crushing, that you felt like the very ground beneath you would give way? David had been there, and instead of despairing, he did what the faithful always do. He cried out to the Lord, and God answered, not with a whisper, but with thunder, with smoke and lightning, with storms and shaking earth. It's the kind of divine response that makes Hollywood's special effects look like child's play. Why did God do all that? Because David says, He delighted in me. Now let's pause. Isn't that amazing? God, perfect, holy, majestic, delighting in a flawed, sometimes foolish man. Yes, because David was humble, repentant, and trusted the Lord even when it hurt. That's what God delights in. Now some may wonder, how could David say, "The Lord rewarded me according to my righteousness," when we know he had sinned so grievously? The answer is repentance. You see, righteousness isn't about being perfect. It's about pursuing the right, falling sometimes, but always getting back up with God's help. David's heart, though broken by sin, was always chasing after God. When he sinned, he didn't justify it. He confessed it. He didn't run from God. He ran to him. Like a child who scrapes their knee and runs home to their father, David knew where to go for healing. And when God sees that kind of heart, he responds. To the merciful, he shows mercy. To the pure, he reveals himself. But to the proud, God resists them. Why? Because pride says, I don't need you. And the moment we believe that lie, we walk straight into spiritual ruin. David called God his rock, his fortress, and his deliverer. Why all these metaphors? Because sometimes we need more than just theology. We need imagery that speaks to our hearts. A rock doesn't move. It doesn't shake. You can hide in its shadow when the sun scorches, and you can stand on it when everything else is sinking. That's God. In a world of uncertainty, He remains. David didn't become king by accident. He had to fight, but not alone. He said, "By my God, I can leap over a wall." Now that's not a superhero boast. It's a truth we all need. With God, the impossible becomes possible. Like a soldier trained by heaven, David was prepared by God for battle. And when he swung his sword, it was God who gave him the victory. We're not talking about just ancient warfare here. We're talking about spiritual battles, temptation, fear, doubt. David's story reminds us that if God arms us with truth, steadies our feet, and strengthens our grip, we can conquer what once overwhelmed us. David didn't just rule Israel. His influence reached the nations. Enemies bowed. Strangers respected him. But more importantly, David always gave the credit back to God. He never said, "Look what I did." He said, "Look what God has done through me." And that's the secret to lasting influence, living in such a way that others see not just your work, but God's hand behind it. When David gives his last prophetic words, he doesn't talk about his fame, his battles, or his wealth. He talks about justice. He says the best kind of ruler is the one who rules in the fear of God. Why? Because power without reverence leads to destruction. But a leader who trembles before God can lead with wisdom and compassion. Sadly, David admits, "My house is not so with God." He knew his family was flawed. His sons had rebelled. The sword never truly left his house. But even so, David held on to hope. Hope in God's covenant. Hope in grace. It's a reminder for all of us. God's promises aren't based on our perfection, but on His. Next, we meet David's mighty men, a group of warriors so bold they make modern action heroes look tame. One killed 800 enemies in a single battle. Another fought so long that his hand literally froze to his sword. And 3 men risked their lives just to bring David a drink of water. Why mention all this? Because greatness isn't just about the man on the throne. It's about those who serve with loyalty, courage, and faith. These men didn't follow David because he was perfect. They followed him because they believed in the cause of the kingdom. That's a lesson for us. Christ is our perfect king, and we're called to be his mighty men and women, faithful, brave, and willing to serve no matter the cost. Just when you think the story should end on a high note, it takes a dark turn. David decides to count the people, an act that seems harmless but was rooted in pride. Why was this a sin? Because David was putting his trust in numbers, not in God. Sometimes we do the same, don't we? We count followers, dollars, votes, or views, thinking strength comes from statistics. But faith doesn't count, it trusts. When David realized his mistake, he repented. God gave him a choice of 3 punishments. And instead of choosing, David simply fell into the mercy of God. "Let us fall into the hand of the Lord," he said, "for his mercies are great." A plague came. 70,000 died. But when David saw the destruction, he pleaded, "Let it be on me." He offered a sacrifice on the threshing floor of Arana, and he refused to give God something that cost him nothing. That's worship. Costly, humble, real. David's story doesn't end in triumph or tragedy. It ends in truth. He was a man of strength and of failure. He wore a crown, but bowed in repentance. He led armies, but followed God. And in the end, what mattered wasn't that he never sinned, but that he always returned to the God who saves. So here's the question for us. Will we trust the rock like David did? Will we fight the good fight, not with pride, but with faith? Will we be counted among the king's mighty men, not because of what we've done, but because of whom we follow? The last song of David still echoes today, and if you listen closely, you can hear the melody calling you higher, to courage, to repentance, to faithfulness. The story isn't really about David, it's about the God who delivers, and that same God still reigns.